Today I'm going to talk about the energetics of letting someone go. This is a really difficult place for people to be in their lives when they are letting somebody go. Most of the time, this happens in relationships is where we see this the most. This can also happen in friendships or other connections that we have in life. But primarily today, I'm going to really be talking about when you have a partnership or a relationship romantically of some kind that is dissolving or has already come to a close and you're really struggling with that. The first thing I want to talk about is that sometimes we don't get an answer. And this happens frequently, especially in romantic relationships. And that can be really difficult because when you don't get an answer, you start to wonder, right? You're like, well, what did I do wrong? Oh my gosh, I'm going to do the same thing wrong in another relationship. Or sometimes we really hope that that answer will help us make sense of things or make us feel more comfortable with the loss, or will just explain it in a way that will make everything okay. And the thing is that's not what's going to happen, right? And we really can't force somebody to give us an answer either. And I think this is also very difficult. It's really, you're not entitled to the answer. And I know that's going to be kind of a rough point for a lot of people. You know, you're really not entitled to anything. You get what you get, and you can't control what somebody else is going to give you or not give you. And I see so many people trying so hard to just pull and pull and pull that answer out of the person or just out of thin air about the situation. And it kind of drives them crazy. And I think you really have to be in a place of acceptance and realize that sometimes you're not going to get an answer, and that is the answer. And it's not maybe fair, it's maybe really not cool, but it is what it is. And until you can accept that, then you're going to be stuck in this situation forever, and it's going to prevent you from moving forward and having all these other really great experiences, and you're going to miss out. So it's really important to kind of figure out how to move through that space on your own without getting an answer, because most people aren't going to get one. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is what happens if you actually get the answer, right? A lot of times we think that getting the answer is going to be the be-all, end-all fix to making us feel better and warm and fuzzy, or just more accepting about the transition that's happening, right? Or the loss that's happening. That's not normally the case. I want you to take a minute right now and think back to a situation, romantic or just otherwise in your life, where you got the explanation from somebody about what had happened, where it helped, right? So it's the thing is with the help, it's like it's not going to fix the situation. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And so that's why I think the answer is sometimes not always going to be the be all end all of what's happening for us. And I'll give you an example. So back in middle school, I had this friend that she was my best friend. We did everything together. And one day she just stopped being my friend. And I was so confused. And at a time when you're young and you have no like worldly or life experience, something like that can be really traumatic and difficult and heartbreaking. And I really didn't find out until a year later why she stopped being my friend. And it was a really silly reason. And it didn't make me feel any better. And like, that's something that I remember it being really shocking to me. It was like, I thought it was going to like help me, like all the pieces fall into place, help the whole world make sense. All I had were more questions that still were unanswered. And it was just kind of like this loop. And so for me, getting the answer really wasn't something that was helpful. You know, I found that in romantic relationships as well. You know, sometimes getting the answer, it doesn't really help. It's just an answer. Something else really interesting I see a lot of people doing is they are information gathering for a false sense of control. Now, what does this look like? This looks like somebody stalking your Facebook page, your Instagram, your Twitter, whatever other social media things are going on. It looks like somebody being really out there and inappropriate and driving by your house at night. It looks like people getting information gathering through like friends of friends, trying to figure out what's going on. And people do this, and it's unhelpful for a bunch of different reasons. One, knowing the information isn't going to change anything that's happening to you, right? It's just kind of working you up and prolonging things and keeping you stuck in that space because you're still attached to it, right? The second really interesting thing that I found out is that your brain doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. So if you're continually looking at pictures or getting involved in events of this other person, your brain still thinks that you're together. And so if you are not actually, that's not what's happening in reality. There's a disconnect between the two, and it's keeping you stuck in that place. It's keeping your emotions and your heart stuck in that place. It's also keeping you from moving on because your brain is still with that other person, right? And so it can create a really difficult situation. So while it is hard to go kind of cold turkey and just, block people or stop yourself from viewing those things, I think it's a really important part of the healing process in order to be able to do so. The next thing I want you to consider is that this is not something necessarily that you did wrong, right? Like this separation or this break or whatever's happening, it's not always your fault. I think that's the first place that most human beings go to, because the first thing we tell ourselves is what? Oh, I'm worthless. I'm not good enough. I'm ugly. I'm whatever, A, B, C, and D, right? Like we tell ourselves all these terrible things about yourself that you would never say to anyone else in the world, right? Not your best friend, not your mom, like nobody, but we tell it to ourselves, right? Which is really, really horrible and damaging and also incorrect, right? Sometimes somebody is just not for you, and that's okay. So I think we really have to take a really close look at that if this is something we're doing to ourselves in relationships. Now, the next thing I want you to consider, this is actually a really helpful tool, but it can also be a very painful tool. So use it wisely, make sure you are ready and prepared, right? So oftentimes in my life, I've been in weird situationships or confusing relationships or trying to connect with somebody, and there's been a lot of discombobulation or some confusion about things. And I've just kind of been really struggling. I'm like, this cannot continue. This is not fair to me. I just want to know what's going on. So what you do is you ask the universe to step in and help you out. And you say, look, if this is the right person for me, help fix whatever this stuff is and bring us together. And if it's not, I want you to just remove them in such a way that I can't hold on to them. And it's a really good strategy because it works. But it's also a terrible strategy because when it works, it can be really painful and upsetting and hurtful. But in retrospect, I will tell you the times that I have tried this, looking back, I've always been really grateful. Because the person, if they were still in my life, they were not a good person for me. They were not a good match. They would have prevented me from doing all these amazing things that I've gotten to do, these people I've gotten to meet. All these really great things that I have loved about my life would not have been there if I would have drugged this person with me. So I think that's another really important tool or thing that you can use if you find yourself stuck in a similar situation. The next thing I want you to consider if you're really hurting is that, do you actually miss them or do you just miss the idea of them? Sometimes we get caught in places where we miss the idea of who they were in our lives, right? There's no one to call anymore to share that really great, exciting thing that happened, or there's a big empty space in your house or your apartment where you guys used to live together, right? And so you might not necessarily actually miss them. You might miss the idea of somebody being there, right? The companionship, the friendship, just having somebody to take care of you when you're sick or to laugh at your really horrible jokes or just to give you a hug if you've had a really rough day. Like those are valid losses that you are experiencing. And so sometimes it's not the person we miss, but it's the idea of them and the things that they provided to us. So I think that's an important consideration and distinction to make as well when we are really going through these difficult times and is the upheaval in our life of somebody leaving it. The last and final thing I really want you to consider too is these are losses that like people aren't really talking about too, right? You've lost a future with that person, which is essentially a dream. And when dreams die, it's very difficult to watch. And it doesn't have to be a relationship dream. It can be a work dream or a life dream or something else. But when you realize something isn't going to happen, it is a loss. It is a big loss, right? And sometimes we do experience a great deal of grief within that loss. And we have to respect that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to transition through that. And I think sometimes we don't look at it in that way. So trying to process our relationship, there's a piece of that process that gets ignored. And it makes it even more difficult for us to move through that space. So if there's a way that you want to acknowledge that loss, or you want to have a closure ceremony for that loss, or if there's something that you need to do in a tangible way that might help you through this transitional space of losing somebody and having to just really let them go. So I hope that's given you some things to consider and think about, especially as you're going through this process. If you are going through it right now, I just want to tell you I love you. You're doing a great job. I know it's really hard, but you can do this. If you have any experiences you want to share that might be helpful, we would all, I think, love to hear that and benefit from that as well. So until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you have a beautiful day.